Boris, let me begin with you. Tell me, what have you learned as a historian over the past year? I keep thinking of Lenin's quote, famous quote, that there are years that go by where nothing happens. There are weeks that go by where years happen, decades happen. I feel like a decade has happened over the past year.
Without a question, Joe. I mean, it's just been, when you look back at that year and what was expected of the Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainian people, it does show the magic of leadership. You know, there's no question that we're in the presence of somebody who was able to give their strength and their confidence, Zelensky did, to the Ukrainian people. And it's made all the difference in the world. It's not just the lack of equipment or the corruption of the Russian army. It's what the Ukrainian people with that leadership have been able to do. I keep remembering a video. We saw one this morning, but another one that Zelensky did that was so powerful. I mean, he went to a bombed out area. And he pointed out the pieces of destruction. If this was my car, this was somebody's dog, this was somebody's house, this was somebody's father, somebody's daughter. But then he pivoted and he said, but the Russians don't understand that we will win. We will build these cities again. And then they showed build cities. We will sing again. We will honor the dead. I mean, it was just an extraordinary use of media. He's done that in capital after capital around the world, just as Biden has been able to keep that coalition together. Think of Zelensky going from one capital to another, including ours, and being able to project that confidence in the American people. I remember when he was at the joint session of our Congress and everybody was clapping for him. And he said, no, it's not me, it's the Ukrainian people. That's when leadership and people become one. And it's very hard to stop that when that happens. And that's what Churchill was able to do in that same year. He had a year from May of 1940 when they were the only country standing alone against the German blitzkrieg. Everybody thought they'd be invaded by Germany in 6 months. And instead he held out. The Air Force beat the Luftwaffe. You know, he said, never have so many owed so much to so few. They withstood the bombing. They came out the next mornings and their houses would be open. Their stores would say more open than usual with that defiance that Churchill's words had given. We're seeing the power of leadership and morale and people. And it's an extraordinary thing to see. Now we just got to get them the weapons they need to go on the offensive. There's still a lot more to be done.
Roger, a year ago in the Times, you wrote, Mr. Putin is an enigma, but he is also the most public of figures. Seen from the perspective of his reckless gamble in Ukraine, a picture emerges of a man who seized on almost every move by the West as a slight against Russia, and perhaps also himself. As the grievances mounted, piece by piece, year by year, the distinction blurred. In effect, he became the state. He merged with Russia. Their fates fused in an increasingly messianic version of restored imperial glory. Is he still an enigma?
I think less so. We've seen what a brutal autocrat Vladimir Putin became, and there's no question that in this invasion he made an enormous mistake, and it's been a debacle for him. At the time when he launched the invasion, he'd been on a roll. He'd annexed Crimea, he'd moved into the Donbass, he'd dominated the endgame in Syria, he'd flattened Aleppo. Nobody seemed to care, ultimately. Germany went on buying gas and fossil fuels. The United States protested, but not strongly. And as a result, I think when he went into Ukraine, he had this feeling of invincibility. And in his isolation during COVID, he had become obsessed with Ukraine and the fact that it wasn't a real nation in his view. And boy, has he ever forged a nation. Ukraine has grown in its nationhood and is absolutely committed to victory in this war. Now, what exactly victory is, we don't know. Is it a return to the February 23 lines? Is it recapturing Crimea? Is it the fall of Putin? It's hard to know. What we do know from history is that even though Russia has suffered grave setbacks, the limits to Russia's ability to absorb pain are not really known. It is very, very high. This is a country with 11 time zones, and that strategic depth, well, just look at Napoleon, look at Hitler. So how exactly can Russia be defeated? That is the question today as we go into the second year of the war that is before Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and Europe and the West.
Minister Atal, good morning. It's good to see you. France has committed something like $1.5 billion American dollars to Ukraine to support the war effort there. President Macron, not lately, but last year, was trying at least to speak with President Putin to negotiate some kind of way out of this war. President Macron said recently he hasn't spoken to Putin since September, realizing those conversations probably were not fruitful. Is there hope in Europe? Is there hope in France that there is a peaceful way out of this? Do you still hold out some hope that Putin somehow, some way may be open to a way out of this?
Well, good morning. And what we're aiming at is Ukraine's victory. And yes, if a peaceful way is possible, we have to search for it. And I think the first conclusion we can make a year after the invasion began is that Russia went through major failures. The failure on the battlefield with the incapability to win on this field, the failure to rally other countries around an anti-Western union against us, and the failure to foresee the consequences of this war. What we're seeing now is Russia getting weaker and more isolated every day. We see European countries such as Finland and Sweden wanting to join NATO as soon as possible. And I think Putin didn't foresee this when he started this invasion. So this war could be long, but we must stand with Ukraine and keep on standing with Ukraine. The European Union spent $73 billion in military, financial, economic, and humanitarian assistance. And I think one other conclusion is that a year after the beginning of the war, we are more united than ever against Russia's brutality and imperialism.